I call the honourable member Scott Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're welcome.
Kia ora. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise in support of the third reading of these bills now divided, but in doing so to also thank the member Andrew Little for what may have been his final speech as Labour's Justice spokesperson, and to remind him that yes, his leader has said that the train is leaving, but the leader is actually David Cunliffe, as I understand it, not David Shearer, as he mentioned. And that just goes to show the depth of confusion and malaise and concern that exists within the Labour caucus when the Justice spokesperson stands up a week after a change of leadership and still refers to the old leader, once removed, as the current leader. Just shows the mess that the Labour Party are in, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister Judith Collins, Minister of Justice, for bringing this legislation to the House. I'd also like to thank the officials who worked very hard and diligently on this piece of work for us, at times under great time pressure to achieve deadlines. And I'd also like to thank the hard-working and diligent members of the Justice and Electoral Select Committee who, across the party divides of the House, actually worked, I thought, in a very collaborative and useful way on this legislation as it went through deliberations before the committee. It is quite complicated legislation. It amounts to the first full, real reform review process of our family court justice process since its inception some 30 years ago. And the legislation now falls into the omnibus divided parts, and I'm not going to go through those individually, but in preference I would like to just acknowledge the 386 written submissions that the committee received, and also the 217 oral submissions that the committee heard in various places around the country. Many of those submissions, sir, were from people who had absolute personal horror stories to tell us. They told us, for instance, about the expensive, slow, drawn-out, ineffective and stressful process that the family court system had provided for them. And changes made during the Select Committee process mean that as a result of the work of the committee, the legislation, I think, is better legislation than was before us at first reading. But the people who came before the family court and told us their stories, often they're people who are stressed, they're emotional, and they're at a vulnerable point in their lives because, sir, a relationship breakup and the subsequent sorting out of details can be one of the most difficult things that people can confront in their lives. But that said, sir, the vast majority of couples who do go through a relationship split and the fallout that occurs as a result of that, the vast majority of them, sir, actually do sort their affairs out without the need to go to the family court. And they do so, sir, because they are able to, as adults, come to terms with the changed situation in their relationship, and they can work a way through it. The vast majority do. And on this side of the House, sir, we take the view that where people can sort things out for themselves, they should. That recourse to the state-provided services and facilities should not be a course of first action for people who are going through relationship breakups. So, we don't subscribe to the view that the family court should be the first option in resolving relationship issues. The reforms that we're considering today, sir, mean that the family court will be a better, more efficient provider of a service for those who actually need it. Let's have a look at why those changes are needed. The family court has been, for a long time, being criticised by people who are involved with it as being adversarial, of placing additional stress and already testing circumstances on people who are already vulnerable and under stress. People complain that it's not focused enough on the most serious cases, such as domestic violence, and people complain that it's negative for children who are subjected to the process. So, sir, these reforms being considered today establish a new family dispute resolution process that will absolutely focus our family justice system very clearly towards supporting people to resolve their disputes where appropriate outside the court system. And, Sarah, I think that's a good thing. Couples will be required to go through a parenting through separation program and at least attempt a family dispute resolution before applying to the court for parenting or guardianship orders. And unless there is an exemption such as might apply where there is a case of violence being involved, and I think that's right and appropriate, sir, these reforms will support people to resolve disputes out of court where appropriate and ensure that the court, when it's needed, is focused on the most vulnerable. This legislation and the divided bills are good pieces of reform. They're needed pieces of reform. I thank the Minister for bringing it to the House, and I commend these bills wholeheartedly for consideration by the House.
I call the Honourable Member, Dr. Rajin Prasad. Namaste.
Namaste, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to take a call on the final reading of this bill, but to do it with some sadness, because this is the kind of measure that in this area ought to be supported. There ought to be agreement across the House when we are trying to improve a system. But this bill doesn't do that, or this series of bills now don't actually do that. And I want to go through the three major drivers to this bill as we see it, Mr. Speaker. The first driver here is the increasing costs in the family court system. And let me talk a little bit about that, because it seems to have become a principle by which this government operates. If something we are doing is costing more, then by definition there's something wrong with it and we must reduce it, without actually having a look to see why is that cost increasing. And so when we do that, you know, the only argument we get from this minister and from this process is that this is out of hand because it costs too much. And because it costs too much, we must now find a system that actually destroys the very value of the services provided in the family court. The family court is 30-odd years old, and it has stood us well. You know, it's a